It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Charles Brown, MPA, is a senior researcher with the Allen Voorhees Transportation Center, an adjunct professor at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. He has 15 years of public and private sector experience in urban and regional planning, policy, and research. He also has extensive experience in community development, having worked with government agencies, for-profits, and nonprofit organizations in 3 states, Mississippi, Florida, and New Jersey. Mr. Brown is the recipient of several notable honors in transportation and receives invitations to speak locally, nationally, and internationally. He is a military veteran and a recipient of the Mississippi Commendation Medal and Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Please join me in welcoming Charles Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, University YMCA, faculty, staff, students. Thanks for taking your time out of your very busy schedule to be here to hear from a guy that's coming from the Northeast by way of the Southeast, by way of all over the U.S. So thank you for being here. Today I want to talk about a very, very important topic. And that topic is centered around the barriers to biking for blacks and Hispanics. But before I start, I want to offer a disclaimer. What I'm discussing here, these are my words, my thoughts only. They in no way reflect the opinions and views of Rutgers University. I'll be discussing a lot of sensitive topics, elephants in the room, whatever, but whatever question you have, I'll do my best to answer that question, so nothing is off limits. So with that being said, I would like to go ahead and get started. First and foremost, as I stated, I'm coming in from New Jersey, so I have the pleasure of working in one of the largest regions in the country, which is the New York metropolitan area, which has a population of around 23 million people. Prior to that, I worked as a city transportation planner for the city of Orlando, not Disney, but the city of Orlando. It has a population of around 262,000 people. Before that, I was reared in Sugar Lock, Mississippi, which is where my family lives to this day. And we have a very large population of around 562 people. And that is when our cousins are in town from Chicago, Milwaukee, New York, and other places. So that is what I consider to be home. The locals call it Sugar Lock, as in having some sugar with a lock. But the correct pronunciation is Shaquela. It is Indian territory, or it was formerly Indian territory. I've also had the pleasure of serving in the U.S. military. I was trained in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which has a population of around 70,000 people. And the reason why I show you that is because when I go around the country, I want people to understand something. I do have 99 problems, but understanding you is not one. I've lived in rural areas, suburban areas, the city, the inner city, you name it. I've either lived, worked, or played there. Probably played a lot too often in some of the places, but I've definitely probably experienced some of the things that each of you have. And I say that not to be cocky, but I say that because I'm sure there's a common thread there where we can identify and agree on something. So let's try to start there. I also want to address the elephant in the room when I travel. Being that my name is Charles Brown, people quite often ask me, are you kin to James Brown? No, we're not kin. I wish we were. But according to the family reunions I've been to, the books I've read about my family, none of them stated that we are any kin, so no, I'm not. Next, you may call me Charlie Brown. You may call me Charlie Brown because I've heard that since kindergarten. I know my name is Charles Brown, and when people see your name tag, they're like, Charlie Brown! Especially my white brothers and sisters, for some reason they want to call me that. I only ask one thing of you. If you're going to call me Charlie Brown, please have this image in mind. All right, I think he's a handsome guy, and I want to kind of reframe the way you think about Charlie Brown going forward. So yes, on most days, you may call me Charlie Brown. However, this is where I pivot. Today, I am Franklin. How many of you are aware of who Franklin is by your hand? Great. Well, those of you who are not aware of who Franklin is and Charlie Brown, here's your introduction to Franklin. I am Franklin today because if you know anything about Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving, Franklin was invited by Charlie Brown to attend the Thanksgiving party. While Franklin asked Charlie Brown what he should wear, he got no response, so Franklin showed up anyway in his nice blue shirt. But when he got there, Snoopy told him to sit in this chair. And if you know anything about this chair was considered the evil chair. Now, when you look at this image nowadays, some of you may see the power imbalance here. Some of you may also think or try to imagine what Franklin may have thought while being invited to sit in that evil chair. And I bring that up because that evil chair is indicative of the very communities that Franklin, as an African American, finds himself in today. He was also told or wasn't allowed to speak or talk during the Thanksgiving dinner. This is very indicative of the transportation decision-making processes that happen throughout the U.S. when you are engaging blacks and Hispanics. But try to imagine for a second if you were Franklin, and here's the interactive piece of the presentation. I want some of you to just scream out, holler out what you think Franklin is thinking while sitting here at the table. Anyone, over here, just say it. Let's hear it. Why am I here? What else? I'm nothing. I hope he didn't think that, but that's possible. What else?
Why did I get this funky chair?
Why did I get this funky chair? What else? No one is sitting next to me. Keep going. I'm in charge. White people, what? White people are crazy. Welcome to the Midwest. What else? This food is nasty. Oh, that's interesting. First time hearing that one. What else? Someone in the back here. What is he thinking? Is he afraid? Is he lonely? What if you replace Franklin's race with a different gender? What if he was a woman and everyone else around the table were men? Women, what will you be thinking?
They better not ask me to clean up.
They better not ask me to clean up. What else? Why am I the only one with utensils? What else? What am I doing here? Well, I stated that he was placed in that evil chair to get you all to, if possible, to empathize with Franklin here and to understand that even though this took place right after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, these conditions, if you look closely, still take place today. This is still very much the transportation decision-making process when people check a box for public engagement. Having said, we've already engaged the Hispanic community, and they mean one Franklin. We've already engaged the black community, and they mean one Franklin. So as you move forward in your work, think about the Franklins of the world. And I see many of you looking at me like this currently. I didn't make that story up. You can Google it. It has since changed, but I wanted to bring that to your attention. And here's proof that that chair was evil, because some of you are going to question that as well. That evil chair actually fought with Snoopy. So here's the proof. It's not Photoshop. I know we live in the world of fake news nowadays, but this isn't it. This is real. This is from the clip. So here's proof that that was an evil chair. So I say all that to say that normally you may call me Charlie Brown. I've heard it forever. But today I want to be Franklin. And today I want to be Franklin because I want to remove the blindfold that some of you have around your eyes. I want to reveal to you some of the conditions that people are facing, because I think that if you truly want to change the visible, you have to first change the invisible. And the invisible is what I'm here to point out today. Don't worry, I'm a researcher. I understand that without data, you are just another person with an opinion. I like to be opinionated, but I like to have data to support that. So I've brought all the data I have to make my point clear here today. So now I'm going to share with you my research, which looked at the barriers to biking for Blacks and Hispanics in New Jersey. And in terms of the purpose was to sort of ascertain these barriers to identify solutions to bicycle use among Blacks and Hispanics. And we had three basic questions. The first question was, why do Blacks and Hispanics choose not to bicycle? Very simple question. The next one was, what prevents current Blacks and Hispanics from choosing to bicycle more? And then thirdly, what could be done to encourage all of them to bicycle more often? What I did was I assembled a team of graduate students at Rutgers University. I think we're playing you guys this weekend. I hope you get a win. We conducted a very comprehensive literature review. And what we found is that very few studies had addressed this topic. We also hosted two focus groups, one with Blacks, one with Hispanics. The one that was hosted with Hispanics was held in Spanish only. The one that was held with Blacks was of course held in English, but each participant across both focus groups received a $50 incentive for attending. If they needed childcare would have been provided, however, they did not need it, and they also received food and drinks for their attendance. I strongly believe in incentivizing people for their time, because even though you may think you're the expert, if you're going to them to ask them questions that they have the answer to, in my opinion, they are the experts. So please respect their time and attention. We also administered 30 surveys in 34 different towns throughout New Jersey over the course of a year, because we wanted to make sure that we were going throughout the state to really get to what people who we consider to be hard to reach populations. And very simply, when it comes to what an intercept survey was, and we had two of these, if I approach my man here on the street, which is what my graduate students were advised to do, I would ask you, have you biked within 12 months of today? And you would say yes. If he said yes, I would give him what we deemed a bicyclist survey. If my man here said no, he would get what we deemed a non-bicyclist survey. There were questions that were not identical on these two surveys, but the meat of them both were identical in terms of the questions. So now I'm going to share with you the results of that. In terms of the respondents, here's the demographic characteristics. Over 2,000 surveys were collected while engaging people on the street. It was around 38% Black, 32% Hispanic, Latino, and 16% white. And of course, these numbers don't add up to 100% because we had others and others and others. The main point here is that we made a concerted and an intentional effort to really capture the voice of Blacks and Latinos, which is why they're disproportionately represented here in the study. The persons in age group 18 to 24 made up the largest share of the respondents, and 54% of our respondents were males. Their educational attainment was lower than the population of New Jersey as a whole, which has a really high educational attainment. But it was comparable to the 34 towns that we did the study in. The respondents were also poorer than the population in New Jersey. I think the median household income in Jersey is around $75,000+. So it's not hard to be poorer than the population as a whole in New Jersey. And 80% of the household had 2 or more adults present. 49% had no children present within them. And more than a quarter reported not having bicycles present. That's going to be a theme that you're going to see throughout this presentation. And then lastly, these respondents reported having fewer motor vehicles available in their household than the study area and New Jersey as a whole. So they're really public transit, walking, et cetera, dependent. So when it came to the country of origin, this was a way to kind of get at who was an immigrant and a non-immigrant without asking that question directly, because sometimes that could be offensive. So we asked people, where did you spend the first 12 years of your life in the survey? And here's what we got. We found that nearly 1 in 4, or 21%, spent their formative years outside the U.S. So for almost 1 out of every 4 respondents we got, we know that many of them were immigrants. And so part 3 or 4 or 5 of this study is going back to kind of look at the differences between non-immigrant and immigrant populations as well. Also, so now what I want to do is move into the select questions from the part that was unique to the bicyclist survey. So I asked my gentleman here, had he bicycled within 12 months? And he said, yes, I gave him the bicyclist survey. Here's what individuals such as him said when asked a few questions. We asked directly, what was your reason for cycling? They stated that, the majority, they bicycle simply to be healthier and have fun. I'm going to show you that because I want you to start looking at why then is the push more along cycling to work and not cycling just recreationally. So when you think about transportation agencies, et cetera, there's a huge push to get these communities to bike for work reasons. They're saying, at least in this study, we bicycle to be healthier and to have fun. So if you want to encourage bicycling, how about starting with the healthy and the fun part first? Secondly, we asked them about places within their neighborhoods they can safely bike to. Here you see nearly 22% felt that they can bicycle to the local parks and trails from their homes. So once again, they didn't state they could bike to work. They stated that they can get to parks and trails. If you want to start encouraging more of them to bike and walk, invest in trails, et cetera, and start with the health and the fun. We asked about bicycle club membership. By show of hands, how many people in the room are a member of a bicycle club? All right, so that's pretty telling. But you see here when we asked that question, the overwhelming majority, 93%, are not active in bicycle clubs or organizations at all. And I think that's another area that I want to explore more to see what is it about clubs that are sort of keeping people away or people not being interested in these bicycle clubs, especially knowing that we have great people representing clubs across this country. Here are the questions that that were unique to the non-bicyclist survey. We asked them how many of them knew how to bicycle and how many were interested. You could see here that the majority actually knew how to bicycle even though they were classified as a non-bicyclist. And women and Hispanic people were more interested in learning than their counterparts. When we asked for their reasons for not cycling, the #1 reason was, which was for more than a quarter, I do not own a bicycle. 11% also said that I do not feel safe while bicycling. Those themes are going to be consistent throughout this presentation as well, and I'm hoping we can have some engaged discussions about that piece. We asked about negative bicycle experiences, such as have you had a negative bicycle experience that led to you not bicycling more? And you can see here that more than a quarter reported having had a negative bicycle experience, and a sizable minority stated that it often limits how often they choose to bicycle. So looking at the negative bicycling experiences as a way to get at how to remove barriers is important as well. Now to the questions that were identical for both groups. We asked the first question, do you think a bicycle is expensive to purchase and maintain? If you think one is expensive to purchase and maintain, raise your hand at this point. Raise it higher, don't be shy. All right? So less than 10% of you all stated that it is expensive to purchase and maintain. However, in this survey, more than 1/4 thought that it was. And this was especially true for women of color. When it came to bike share programs, is there a bike share program nearby? Yes? No? There is? How many of you are aware of it? Raise your hand. There's not one. So most of you are not aware because some of you are getting it wrong. Some of you, so if there's one, there's either one here or there's not one here. Who is aware of is there a bike share program here? Yes or no? I trust the people over here, they say no. Oh, on the college campus. And some are. Yes.
The bike club here for $25 a year.
Okay.
And you can take it in and get your bike fixed. They have all the tools.
Okay, so when I refer to a bike share program, I'm referring to City Bike. Are many of you familiar with City Bike in New York? All right. These are city bikes that are shown here. I'm also referring to Indigo Bicycle in Philadelphia. Now, if you live in New Jersey, no matter where you are, for the most part, you are within less than an hour from either location. So we wanted to know how many people were aware of these regionally known bicycles stations, and the majority, 54%, were not aware of either City Bike or Indigo. And this is problematic considering the number of people that are using public transit to get into New York as well as Philadelphia. This could be a very strong component to reducing their last mile trip. We then asked the question, because we hear across the country that minorities are not interested in bike share. We asked how many of you are interested in the bike share system. And you can see here that an overwhelming majority, 85%, stated that they would use bike share if it was in their community. So let's please debunk the myth that people of color are not interested in bike share. The issue is that most bike share is placed within the central business district, away from the people who want to use it. And we can go back and forth as to why that reason may be. But you also see here that females were even more interested than the males, looking at the top bar chart. You also see that Hispanics were more interested than African Americans or mixed race populations. And overall, 85% of all respondents were stated that they would use bike share. We asked the question, who do you think bicycles in your community the most? Is it the rich? Is it the middle class? Or is it the poor? Scream out what you think. Who bicycles the most? Middle class. Who else? Anyone else differ? Poor. Who do you think? Anyone think the rich bicycle more? Yes. Scream it out. Rich. Well, what we found in New Jersey is that most people thought that bicycling is done by the middle class. However, more than 1/4 did believe that it was done by the poor. A small minority thought that it was actually done by the rich, surprisingly. We asked about political power. I believe that if you want to transform these communities, a lot of it has to do with people's access to political power to bring about change in their community. So we asked them, what do they think government will, if they think government will make the improvements you see here through the rendering. And the majority of all respondents believe that it is unlikely that their government would actually invest in these changes. You can note here that they went from no bike lanes to trees, et cetera, et cetera. These were the changes that many people want to see. However, they don't believe that government will bring it. So there are arguments that bike lanes are white lanes. There are arguments that bicycle lanes bring gentrification. But what we found consistently is that people of color also want bike lanes. They just don't want them before everything else that they need in their communities. Then we asked about the government support and investment, and what we found is that the majority of all respondents do not feel that government currently supports and invests in cycling in their community, and this was regardless of race and ethnicity. And then lastly, we asked about, not lastly, but next we asked about, would you like a bicycle lane on your street? It's often said, once again, that people of color do not want a bicycle lane in their community because it's going to lead to displacement, gentrification, et cetera. And what we found, however, in our survey is that like 80% of people stated that they would like a bicycle lane on their street. So once again, a lot of the myths that are perpetuated in the literature and the media are being sort of debunked here by people saying we do want these things, but we need to have a greater discussion about the other things that I care about, such as crime, et cetera. Then we asked about safe bicycle storage. Less than 1 out of 4 of people who do not currently bike reported having a safe place to store their bicycle, versus almost nearly 10 out of 10 of the people who bicycle. So one of the barriers is not having a place to store their bicycle. We asked about bicycle theft, and over 1/3 of all respondents reported being victims of bicycle theft. The most important thing here to remember, though, is that not only did they report being victims of bicycle theft one time, but sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times over. So if a bicycle is your primary mode of transportation, and that mode of transport gets stolen once, or twice, or 3 times, when are you going to give up? Many of you may not wait that long, especially if it was your car, which is your primary mode of transportation. Think about the anxiety it would cause within your household if that primary mode was taken away and you could no longer get to and from your destinations. We saw here that males reported being victimized more than twice as females. That has a lot to do with ridership, risk-taking, etc. Then we asked about child safety because we wanted to get at possibly what was happening generationally. Are parents afraid for their children to bicycle or afraid for themselves to bicycle? So they are now saying, I'm afraid for my child, which in turn, the child doesn't learn or love to bicycle the way that you may think they would. And when we asked that question, the majority said they do not feel safe. They do not feel that their children are safe from bicycling within their neighborhood. So we need to kind of get at this sort of generational thing that is happening, fears being passed down due to concerns about bicycling in these communities. And then when it comes to professional bicycle training, we wanted to know because there are many Safe Routes to School programs throughout the country. There's a lot of bicycle clubs, et cetera, receiving funding from local, state, and regional governments to train people in minority communities. However, when we asked the question, had they received this training, 90% of them said they had not. So where's the disconnect between people receiving the money to do the training, but these people not actually being trained? I asked the question, can you train those who you don't understand? Can you train those whom you fear? There are a lot of things that are preventing people from actually moving forward with actually training the people in these communities. Then there's the elephant in the room in New Jersey, which was around police harassment. This question had not been asked in any of the previous surveys, so we wanted to ask it here. And what we found is that more than 1 out of every 10 respondents reported being unfairly stopped by a police officer. If some of you think that percentage is low, if we did a count out here and less than 1 out of every 10 raised their hand, you would feel like we had a problem. This percentage is too high for people to feel like they're being victimized or stopped by police officers. And males reported being stopped at a rate 7 times that of females. And we found that, of course, minorities, those Black and Hispanic, have been stopped at rates disproportionately higher than non-minorities. So when we asked, we gave them a predetermined list of variables to choose from, and we said, what are your barriers to cycling based on this list? And you could see here the order. When it comes to all respondents, the fear of a traffic collision was number 1, as it would be, but number 2 was a fear of being robbed and assaulted. Now, how many of you, by show of hands, when you're riding your bicycle, are fearful that someone is actually going to rob or assault you on your bicycle? Raise your hand if you feel that way. Notice the hands, the majority of the hands that go up in the room. Raise them higher. What gender is highly represented here? Women, right? My man here says it's not surprising. That led me to do additional research to understand the barriers for women, particularly women of color who bicycle versus non-women of color. And this fear around being robbed or assaulted is a serious fear. And the reason why we need to genderize this is because women experience the built environment differently than men do. However, men most times are behind the designs that we have in our community. One quick, simple solution, hire more women, but I'll move on. So this led me to talk about perceived barriers and to challenge engineers to think more about the duality of safety. Sure, we have personal safety concerns when it comes to being hit by a car, but we also have a large percentage of people who are afraid that they will be robbed and assaulted. So when we're doing these traffic analyses, it's important to incorporate the crime data with that to see where the hot spots are so we can better understand the context in which people are living in. And when it came to solutions, we asked them a few questions. What do you want? What would lead to you bicycling more? And really quickly here, a bicycle lane between them and their destination was number 1. An off-street bicycle path was number 2, and secure bicycle parking was number 3. That makes a lot of sense considering that people want to get to the park, they want to get to their other destinations, but they also want to be healthy and have fun, which is what the off-street path can do. And then I don't want my bike stolen, which is why people want secure bicycle parking. But these are the potential solutions that were in the survey. Now I'm going to give you solutions or strategies that I think based on Franklin. Number 1, if there is a complete street policy, please implement complete streets in your community. But number two, when you're doing that, notice here when I go from the first picture to the second picture, the biggest change, and this is a primary minority community, the biggest change isn't necessarily improving the sidewalk, adding trees, adding a bike lane, fixing up the blighted buildings, etc. The most important part here is that it went from a black community to a black community. What happens too often in transportation planning is that you do these renderings and you move out the people who are currently living there in the renderings. It goes from a black community existing to a proposed, and the people that are shown in a proposed picture are not like the people who are currently living there. And then we wonder why people are concerned that their communities are going to be gentrified. The people here wanted to be sure that we kept a person of color at the forefront of that rendering so that people could understand that we want these changes and we want to be present when these changes take place. There's a quote that says that trees planted in minority communities mature just in time for transportation to take, for gentrification to take place. Trees planted in low-income communities mature just in time for gentrification to take place. So if that is true, you could see these bike lanes being the trees, these improvements in the built environment being the trees that lead to the gentrification in those communities and the people present not having an opportunity to benefit from them. Next, embrace the open streets movement. How many of you are familiar with the open streets movement? By show of hands. I do that to see if I need to explain it or not. Well, open streets are when you close streets to cars and open them up to cyclists, people on skateboards, walkers, etc. Think about a large carnival in the street with the primary mission being active transportation. This is happening all over the country. In Guadalajara, Mexico, where I visited, they closed the streets down, I think around 37 miles, 300,000+ people attend every Sunday of the year. 30-something miles of street closure. So the embracing the open streets model allows people to enjoy the bike and do so in a safe environment. Also, when it comes to the crime versus the traffic data, there's a need to encourage crime prevention through environmental design, CEPTED. If you're looking at the environment and you're only considering the traffic concerns, you're missing a big piece of the pie, which is people's fear of crime. So you're able to do these criminal assessments to also encourage the design of the streets. Also, consider the social and the community context. You can build the most beautiful biking community, walking community there is. If people still feel that they're going to be harassed by their neighbors or by police officers, they're going to stay inside or they're going to choose not to bicycle. So please consider the social and the community context when you're doing your design as well. And how many of you are familiar with Walk Score or you use it in some capacity? It helps you make these beautiful decisions, right? I love Walk Score. I hope they're not here. But Walk Score says Camden, New Jersey is very walkable. It says that Trenton, New Jersey is very walkable. It also says that Newark, New Jersey is very walkable. And it says that because it's only considering what you need to get from this point to the door and what's available for you to access. It is not considering the social environment because we know in New Jersey, Camden is one of the most dangerous communities in America from a crime standpoint. We also know that that is true of Newark and Trenton as well. So when you're saying it's walkable, sure, you can get from point A to point B, but there's more than the built environment that you have to consider when you're saying something is walkable or bikeable. You also have to respect the community. There was a call out from Chicago, from the south side of Chicago. Slow Roll felt that they had been disrespected by the local bike advocacy group there. They were not included as part of the Vision Zero conference, and they reached out to people like myself around the country to let their voices be heard. Let's please respect the community when you're going through these processes, especially considering that you're receiving the money, going through the process, and stating that you're going to help these communities. Why not have their voices heard? Next, you have to empower the community. And by empower the community, I'm not saying what my mother in Mississippi would say. She would say, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for what? A lifetime. I moved north, I came back, I said, Mom, I don't want the fish, I don't want you to teach me how to fish. I want the pond and the land that the fish are on, so we can eat for generations. That's empowerment. Everything else is you become my supervisor. Understand the difference between empowerment and not so empowerment. Also, why is it that the community outreach and the engagement processes happen without people of color or black people in the room? This happens way, way too often. Let's make sure we do our job to improve that process. And then sort of lastly, consider the history and the intersectionality of other variables. This isn't always just about transportation. Sometimes this is about transportation and housing, transportation and race and class and gender, transportation and something else. So if you're not familiar with the historical processes or the historical facts that created the conditions that people live in, you're only going to have a current understanding of the problems, and you're not going to be addressing history when you go in the room. And one way to do that is through this new web series I created that educates people on the importance of this. And in that, I point out that if you work for a hospital or a health department or something, you should be aware of the book Medical Apartheid. And it talks about what the medical industry did to black and brown bodies to create many of the advancements in medicine we have today. Believe that people of color still understand that there's this one hospital in the area that they don't go to because they believe that people don't return home from it. There's a fear there. So when you're saying we're the health department trying to engage you, there's a history where grandmothers after grandmothers have said, don't trust them. So even though you may mean well, if you don't understand the history, you cannot service the people. The next thing is around the color of law, which talks about racial residential segregation. And this book points out how the government at all levels played a role in segregating communities. If you don't understand this, you don't understand why north of a certain interstate, all black people live. West of another interstate, all white people live. That is not de facto segregation, that is de jure segregation. It was done through government policy, et cetera. So if you serve in a regional transportation planning authority or some other, understanding this context is important, because you have to come up with the policies necessary to dismantle these things that have resulted in people being segregated in different communities. Then there's the new Jim Crow, which talks about the mass incarceration of black and brown bodies in America and how the police is serving as an occupying force to lock people up. You have to understand why people of color are afraid of the police and they don't always consider them to be the friendly neighbor that many of you consider them to be. And then lastly, there's a book called Ebony and Ivy. There are many colonial colleges that are now, some are Ivy League and otherwise, that profited from and played a role in the advancement of slavery in the United States. So when you work for a university like many of us do, and you go and try to engage that community and they're saying, we don't trust you, there's a reason why. Don't take offense to it, just understand the history. And the history is very important because this quote says that the history never really says goodbye. History says, see you later. That is really important. And with that, thank you very much for your time. I was told to field questions at this point. Any question you want to ask, let's do it. Yes, sir.
Are there regulations in New Jersey where the fairways were headed that say that bicyclists should abide by the same laws that motorists abide by?
So your question is?
Stop signs, stopping to stop signs, et cetera. Not speed, obviously, but paying attention to other traffic.
So to paraphrase your question, you're asking, do bicyclists have the same rules, rights, and responsibilities as motorists when traversing the roadway? The answer is yes, they do. They are expected to act in the same way, although there is gray area when it comes to the classification of whether or not they are a vehicle on the streets of New Jersey. So bikes are not quite considered vehicles in New Jersey through the law, but they still are expected to conduct themselves in the same manner. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the geography of these bike share programs. Is there any community organizing going around to try to spread bike share programs into areas that are not traditionally supported?
I think the Better Bike Share Partnership in Philadelphia is probably doing the best job at trying to engage underserved communities in that process. I think I just saw in, was it Pittsburgh, maybe? They just made it all bike share trips free for everyone, sort of getting at the cost barrier. But when it comes to people working diligently and intentionally in those communities, I would say nationally very few are doing it, but the Better Bike Share Partnership has research that could speak to that, and they do probably the best job in Philadelphia. So not enough to answer your question. Yes, sir.
In regards to the bike share program, to piggyback what he was going off of, I know City Bike is ran by Citibank, and Divvy is its own private company that's doing this. So to put the moniker of that it's public transportation, I'm not sure that it's necessarily publicly funded. Is there a way to reach out to corporations that are headquartered in these states and in these urban communities to have them put those resources back to get genuine community involvement?
Is there a way to engage corporate sponsors to be a part of bike share in a place to?
Bike shares are already, I mean, City Bike is ran by Citibank.
Correct.
Divvy in New York and in Denver is ran by Divvy, a private entity. So although they get funds from the cities, is there something that can get in Trenton, Champaign, Urbana, stuff that we can do to get funds from government resources and get those to help those that don't have those resources?
Yes, are there ways to get funding to towns that don't have it to get bike share there or to better the bike share program? I was repeating your question, I think, for the camera. The answer is yes, there is. Some of the bike share systems that are starting throughout the country have started due to the initial investment by the state government, the State Department of Transportation, through their highway safety improvement funds, or one of those funding mechanisms, do have monies available to invest in bike share. It may be CMAQ, and we have Regional Planning Commission here who could better explain it than I can, but I know congestion mitigation and air quality grants, CMAQ for short. If you're having more people utilize bike share than car, you're reducing the carbon footprint, of course, right? So that's one of the arguments for using funding such as that to enhance bike share usage and the implementation of bike share in underserved communities. Yes. There's also the FAST Act that you can look into as well. Yes.
Well, one of the things I really like your quote without data, you're just another person without an opinion.
Yes.
So
with an opinion.
Yeah, with your opinion.
Yes.
So one, I want to thank you for validating over those 2,000 voices of surveys because that's exactly what they did. So using those voices that New Jersey's administration apparently is not hearing or is not taking the same strategies to hear as you did, what can we as individuals who are not in that environment and maybe not experiencing exactly what they are, what steps can we take to, I guess, further develop? Because even though these are Black and Latino communities in New Jersey, we have Black and Latino communities everywhere. So what can we as individuals do to help validate those voices around the globe?
Well, if you don't want to just have an opinion, you could hopefully encourage someone here to do a similar study. But the way the research works is that this is scalable to your environment. We had over 2,000 respondents. That is sufficient enough to be replicable and to understand what we learned for everyone else. So it is applicable here as well in terms of understanding the barriers. But if you want to contextualize it, you'd encourage your MPO, your city, or your state to conduct a similar study. This study was funded by the New Jersey Department of Transportation. So they paid for that study. They had the research dollars to do it. I also would encourage you to be further educated about what the barriers are, and also to take an interest in the underserved communities, to be a voice for the voiceless. It's important that we also get more minorities engaged in transportation, engaged in planning, as well as public policy. Too often they stay outside that arena, but they're impacted by it. So just taking a real interest in it, making it your mission, I think could go a long ways. Yes, sir.
Are there any environmental groups that are involved with giving money or lobbying for things that you're talking about?
Yes, sir. The question was, are there any environmental groups lobbying for or being a part of addressing some of these barriers? And the answer is yes. Many of them are a part of the Complete Streets movement. And Complete Streets are streets that are designed, operated, and maintained with all users in mind. That include transit, seniors, ADA, and we find in New Jersey and across the country, I want to speak for what I've seen across the country, there are definitely environmental groups that are part of the movement. I can't name any by name, but there are many. I can name one. Sustainable Jersey in New Jersey is one prime example of how they've been involved in it. I'll come back. Go ahead. She,
Riding a bike where you can't breathe, right? Pollution from chemicals.
yeah, so looking at it from the standpoint of obesity as well as health disparities, et cetera, we have New Jersey Future who's involved, New Jersey, what did I just say? Sustainable Jersey, Shaping New Jersey. All of these different groups come at it from either a health or an environmental lens. So that's examples in New Jersey. I'm sure you have them here as well. Yes.
Hi there. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
My question with regards to demographics and maybe future studies. I was wondering if you would consider adding a section where people can identify as both Black and Latino or Afro-Latino.
Yeah, so that was a section in our survey. So when I said there were 38% Black, so let me repeat the question. The question was, from a demographic standpoint, could you include options on the survey that got at more than just race? It also got at ethnicity and the combination of them both. For instance, what happens when you are Black and you're also Hispanic, or you're white and you're also Asian, or something else? We actually had that as an option in the survey. I showed you the demographic piece of the people that identify solely as a particular group. So 38% identify solely as Black, the other as white, but we also had a biracial one there, which is where they fell into that particular category. And I'm always aware of that, and I'm sensitive to that as well. I'll come back, sir. Ladies first, and I'll come back if you don't mind. Over here.
So, as a female cyclist, I'm most concerned about being assaulted primarily by motorists when I am bicycling. Did you get any more information from the women who surveyed about what their concern was with regards to being assaulted or robbed?
So the question was, did we get more information about people's concern while biking, being robbed or assaulted, right? The answer is yes, and that's captured in a focus group, the 2 focus groups that we held. We have information there. That's a whole separate presentation by itself. In addition to that, part 2 of the study was looking at, we went to 4 places in New Jersey. It's called the Women's Study. You can see this online, newjerseybikeped.org. We looked at what were the specific barriers to transportation for Black women versus white women, Black and Hispanic women versus white women. We went to Camden, we went to New Brunswick, and we went to Newark. Those were the 3 urban places. We compared them to a high-income suburban area, which is called Montclair, New Jersey, and we looked at what the differences were between women there. We have that study. That's a separate presentation as well. But there were a lot of concerns around people being robbed or assaulted or victimized while biking. In fact, one of the women in Camden said she lives in a jail. She lives in a jail because she's afraid that she would be robbed or assaulted or her kids would be impacted. So they don't bike in their community. They actually put the bikes in the car and go bike at a local school. And we couldn't figure out why did she say school until we kept asking and asking. And she said, well, the school is where all the cameras are. She also said we go to the regional park. We go to the regional park because that's where everyone else is. So they don't even bike in their communities unless it's the school or unless it's a regional park where you have a multitude of other people coming in town. And lastly, she said that if she's carrying keys in her pocket, what she would do is when she's leaving the house is she would take one of the keys and put in her finger here so that if someone were to run up on her, she has now a weapon that she could use to fend off a potential intruder. So that study is very interesting. My man back here.
I'm just wondering, so you mentioned you found people in many different cities. I'm wondering if you found different patterns depending on the size of the city that they were living in. Like, one kind of thing I can imagine is if you're in a small town and you might work in a different place, and then there's a big barrier, like the only way to get there is a highway, there's the provision for bicycles along the side or across it or whatever.
The answer is, the question is, did we consider like the differences where people live based on where we take the survey? The answer is yes, we consider it. But the answer is also no, we did not go any further because of resources. And because when you have a data set of over 2,000 respondents from all over the state, you can do so much cross-tabulation, looking at different things that you would lose yourself in it. You know, I talked about the whole immigrant, non-immigrant data set we have, the women data set we have, the income piece we could have looked at. We could have looked at just, it was so many ways to slice it. Hopefully when I have time in the near future, I would look into that. But that's certainly worthy. Yes, sir.
Are there any examples of where communities have been transformed with respect to bike infrastructure, such as simply installing bike lanes? And if so, why hasn't, or why is the process of doing the same thing in other communities slower?
I'm going to try to repeat that. Have other communities been transformed through bicycle infrastructure changes? Is the first part of the question. And then you introduce in conjunction and. So the second part of the question is what?
The second part is
why?
Why, if they have been successful implementations of such programs, why have they not been copied and pasted?
Oh, so if they have experienced success, why hasn't it been transferred to other communities? This is a challenge, and this is a challenge because we're being recorded. I want someone to show me examples of where in the bicycle-friendly cities you have across America, those who are league certified, Bicycle League of American Bicyclists, gold, bronze, silver, platinum, otherwise. Let's see if it's true in the underserved communities where you have gold level cities. For instance, let's say that Champaign is a gold level city. Do the black side of towns have access to and proximity to the bicycle infrastructure that the majority of the city has? I say that to say you have the Portlands, you have the Chicagos, the New Yorks, et cetera, who are looked at as these bicycle meccas. Yet you have these sort of areas of town that are black and minority that still don't have adequate infrastructure. So I can answer your question by saying, yes, there are cities that are doing it right and they're transferring this information to other cities, but no, they're not doing it in their underserved communities. And when they are doing it in their underserved communities, people are being pushed out. Maybe someone can challenge me on that and show data otherwise, but that's what I'm seeing. That's why I'm doing this work, because I think that those improvements can happen there and people could stay there. It's just not being paid attention to. So I would even challenge you to take a look at it. Pick a city you love, a Portland, a Seattle, and look at their bicycle infrastructure and then see if there are disparities in the underserved communities. Yes, over here. Up front first, then you. Yes.
What you were just talking about, that seems to be very clear in Urbana. You go across one avenue to the area where most of the Latino families live, and there is nothing.
What side of town is that?
Urbana is right next,
Yeah, I know Urbana, but what side of Urbana? Because Jeff was kind enough to take me on a tour last night.
he goes to one of the events that we have every year in that area. So I would love to ride my bike to that area, and it's just not possible. You have to go through a really busy avenue. So my question is, knowing that, and knowing that it's going to be hard to engage immigrants, especially Latino families, what are your recommendations to get their voices heard? Because there are a lot of things that happen there, and we actually have students who wanted to ride their bikes to school, and their parents are not letting them do it because they have to go around a lot of streets in order to get a safe road.
Yeah. So to paraphrase, your question is, how can we bring about changes in Hispanic communities in the bicycle infrastructure? I think the challenge there lies into the access to the political power. Other communities are making changes happen because they have the ear of the politicians to get it done. However, for some reason in Black and Latino communities, even though they have representation, it doesn't always lead to implementation and investment. So I think organizing, community organizing around a shared goal is important. I also think that you have difficulty in the Black and Hispanic communities with people agreeing that transportation may be the issue. You may get pushback that, no, it's not transportation, because we don't care about the bike anyway. Maybe it's crime, right? So it's about organizing, setting up committees to focus on a particular issue and taking that higher up. Because my views do not reflect the views of Rutgers University, I can also say that when you have representation that is not leading to the change that you want to see in your communities, it's time to get someone else in there. So organizing around a particular issue, such as the lack of transportation infrastructure in your community, you could bring forth a candidate that believes in that and can go and fight on your behalf locally. But in that particular case, it's all about the policies, and the politicians deal with the policies. So that's where you have to fight your fight. Yes, over here first.
Our state representative, Carol Emmons, has a transportation and infrastructure committee that any member of the public is welcome to join. And if you go to her website, they meet weekly or bi-weekly, and she is looking for people to help her address these issues. So go to her website and sign up.
What's her name again? Carol?
Carol, Representative Carol.
Representative Carol
Ammons.
Ammons.
From most of Champaign and Urbana.
Yes. So someone from the audience said she's doing a great job at engaging or getting people together for that. So trying to join her subcommittee so your voices can be heard is important. However, remind her that a seat at the table like Franklin is just the first step. You also want to share in the power in the decisions that are being made. So having or being proximate to power isn't the same as having access to power. If you're there, you want to make sure your voice is being heard and that it show up in whatever plans that result as a point of that. Because that's why many people get discouraged. They join the committees and then they don't see their voice in the end. So make sure your voice is heard. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, this reality has nothing to do with one color better than the other. One night I was driving and a Black person was on a bike, but they didn't have any light and they're dark in their face. I couldn't see them and I almost hit them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of education.
It's a matter of education for who? For you or the person that was riding the bike? Oh, okay.
Putting lights on your bike, whatever, or glow things.
So that wasn't a question, so I don't have to repeat it. That was a comment that it's a lack of education that is leading people of color in particular, who happen to be, quote, Black, riding. We can talk about that offline, but what I would tell you is that if I don't have a light, it may be that I cannot afford a light. And if you cannot see me on that street and I'm biking there, it may not be that there's sufficient lighting to see me on that street. And if you are driving that car and you almost hit me, it may not be that you're paying enough attention to me as well. So it could go on and on and on, but it's more than education. It's also about resources or the lack thereof. There was someone here. Yes, sir.
So I would say the same as to access to power elected, because it is frequently then the minority that whose priorities for access to power do not yet include transportation very high up on the list. But my question now on the method side, it is that same profile. This is an immigrant that fights to work because has nothing, that person doesn't have access to something else to get them there. They're very hard to survey. Your instrument was big enough that you need the data and you need all those parameters. On the other hand, I'm lucky to get, 2 questions answered on Facebook. And that's the reality of trying to reach that person. How are you? Did anybody have a problem getting to work or whatever while you're on the phone? Because sitting them down for a survey of over a page is not likely to get me, a page is a huge survey.
Well, I agree, but I also disagree. I think it's a matter of priority when it comes to state, regional, and local governments in terms of whether or not you have the capacity and the resources to reach people. Location of a meeting matters. Notice we went to 34 different towns over a year using graduate students. We got 2,000 people to respond. The reason why we got 2,000 people to respond is because we were flexible in how we conducted our outreach. When it came to the focus group, we paid people for their time, number 1. Number 2, we fed the people while they were there. Number 3, if there were people with children, we would have provided childcare. That's making it very convenient for people to be there. We also did not host a meeting at a place where there was some history of hostility. We held the meeting with people that they already had connections to. For instance, the Puerto Rican Action Board is a place where we held the meeting. The Latino Hispanic community in New Brunswick is very familiar with and trusts the Puerto Rican Action Board. So we utilize that trusted advocate model to engage them, and it worked. When it came to the streets, we were in the streets near barbershops, near churches, near high pedestrian zones, intercepting people at various times of the week as well as weekend. The problem why it's difficult for organizations is because, 1, most times you don't have enough in your budget to do that level of outreach. And you don't have enough in your budget because it's not that much of a priority. It's a formality. It's not a priority. So yes, it's hard, but if you were to structure your priorities in a way where you would say, we're not moving forward with this plan until we have proper representation from those groups, then you'll make it happen. And then also, many of these government hire engineering firms and public engagement firms that are not representative of the communities that you're trying to engage. To put it very candidly, you would hire a all-black firm to survey in an all-white neighborhood. There's mismatch there. That's an example. I didn't want to go with your status quo, all-white in an all-black neighborhood. You get it? Also, the students who work for us spoke several languages. So when it came to people speaking Spanish, no matter their race or their ethnicity, they were able to engage people in their own language as well. And we had copies of the survey translated in Spanish. If it was a Portuguese neighborhood, we would have had it in that. Russian, we would have had it in that. So we're being very intentional about and deliberate about meeting people where they are, going to them, and then also respecting their culture and having the surveys, et cetera, in their language. A lot of places don't take all of those steps to make it happen. So I can tell you more and more about that, but that's part of it. And then lastly, the reason why you don't get people showing back up at the meetings as I talk to you is that you engage these firms, or if you do the work yourselves, you go there and you're not comfortable sharing the power or sharing the floor. You come there with an agenda, you get the data you want, they don't see you again until you have your next agenda. this is about relationship building long term, so that the next time you go there, I could say, we know Gabe from this regional planning commission, he's a good man. So if he's doing this survey, it's important, because he's gonna follow up and show us the results of the survey. And I'm now gonna be able to see that my voice was somehow reflected or heard in that. That doesn't usually happen either, because of lack of resources. We can go on and on, but I'll go ahead. Yes?
I'm just curious about the Guadalajara bicycling culture compared
Yes.
to places that you're working in the States. How was it? How is it? Or is it?
If you can ever go there, please do. It was amazing. I went with Gil Peñalosa, who is one of the founders of Open Streets, or Ciclavia, and it was founded in Bogota, Colombia. He and his brother, I think he was over the Parks Commission at the time when they started this. And the whole idea was to reclaim our largest public space, which are the roadways. So when you go to Guadalajara for one of these trips, and I don't speak Spanish, it's called Riva Activa. Riva? That's what his name, yeah. It was transformative. It was probably the best time I've spent in a place to see the culture and the people riding, biking, skateboarding, really loving being able to reclaim the streets. So if you can go to Guadalajara, I would highly recommend it. Or Bogota, yeah. I saw a hand over here somewhere. Okay. Any other questions? I'm not on a time clock. My flight is not till 4, so you can ask whatever questions you want. Yes, sir.
In your research, did you find that perception of biking was a barrier at all? Or
Perception. Which perception?
in regards to
Yes, I did. I got you. Did we see or in the survey address perception to bicycling? That was captured in the focus group. So one of the things we asked people was about their concern for appearing to be poor because they bike. We asked women and minorities about does hygiene play a factor? And what we found is that many of the minorities, especially the black respondents, said that they didn't want to show up to work disheveled or sweaty because they already felt that they were being perceived away by their colleagues. The poor thing was a problem for some, not a problem for others in terms of being perceived as being poor because you was riding a bike. We did ask the women in the focus group, I asked them, quite candidly, if I showed up to your house to go on a date and I was riding that bike, how would you feel? One lady said, we're still going on that date. But there were some women who said, well, I would ask, do you have a car? Or do you have something like that? So there are some stigmas associated with the bike, but not as much as one would think.
Well, I don't know about this question.
All right.
No,
No, go ahead.
We live in a mixed neighborhood, and we really like the neighbors. We have some that are friends of ours. And when the kids once in a while get out on their bikes, white or black, in the middle of the street, but I'm concerned that they almost got run over one day. And so I stopped and said, and then they were African American, I care about you. Be careful. I don't want you to get hurt. So, try to stay to the edge of the street. Now, I don't want to interfere with parents. Sometimes parents don't like you to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all right? About the right thing to do?
What you did was absolutely. That's neighborly love. She wanted to know, was it okay to basically look out for her neighbors and say that it's unsafe what you're doing? I would always encourage that. However, whatever decisions you make, there are potential repercussions. And if the repercussion is that the parents are going to be upset because they're thinking otherwise, that's just another barrier to get over. I don't think that should prevent you, however, from looking at or protecting children. I don't believe you had that problem either, so that's good. Yeah.